When you think of royalty, you probably picture grand lives, epic battles, and these noble, sweeping legacies. But what about how they died? Well, that's where the story sometimes takes a very sharp and often hilariously embarrassing turn. So let's dive into some of history's most undignified royal exits. I mean, you'd expect a powerful ruler to have an end that kind of matches their status, right? A death that's worthy of the history books. Something with dignity, with weight, with a certain grandeur. But the reality, yeah, it's often way more absurd. It seems like history occasionally just loves to write the final chapter with a punchline, proving that no amount of power can save you from a truly bizarre and just undignified exit. And that brings us to our first case, Louis III of West Francia. A young king, a celebrated hero whose reign was cut tragically and, let's be honest, comically short. So the setup here is pretty crucial. Louis becomes king at just 16 years old. He splits the kingdom with his brother, and together they hand a massive defeat to a Viking army, taking out something like 9,000 invaders. He's a teenage hero, praised all across the land. You can just imagine the ego on this kid. So, riding high on this huge victory, the young king decides it's time to find a queen. He spots a young maiden and, in a fit of, well, let's call it youthful enthusiasm, he gives chase on his horse as she runs off towards her father's house. And this is where it all goes so wrong. At a full gallop, Louis completely failed to notice a low-hanging doorframe. He slammed his head right into it so hard that he broke his back and died almost instantly. A heroic king taken out by bad architecture. You just can't make this stuff up.
Next up, we have Edmund Ironside, King of England. A man whose nickname suggests a real warrior's end. History, however, had other plans for for his bottom line.
Edmund's reign was a complete whirlwind. He gets crowned in the middle of a Viking invasion, fights so fiercely he earns the name Ironside, but is ultimately defeated. He ends up signing a treaty with the Viking King Canute to split England, but with this one very special clause. Whoever died first, the other would inherit the entire country. Talk about high stakes. Just 1 month later, that clause came into effect in the most shocking way you can imagine. According to some historical accounts, Edmund met his end while he was, attending to nature's call. As the quote suggests, his moment of greatest vulnerability was fatally exploited. The story goes that an assassin was hiding in the pit of his private toilet and stabbed him from below. A brutal, devious, and deeply undignified plot that worked perfectly. King Canute became the sole ruler of England, all thanks to a truly terrible trip to the throne. From the privy to the dinner table, our next monarch, King Henry I of England, was a competent and successful ruler. His kingdom was stable, his reforms were effective, but his appetite? That was his downfall. Now, Henry was the youngest son of William the Conqueror and a very effective king. He brought peace and progress to England, but his life was also marked by tragedy. When his only legitimate son and heir died in a shipwreck, Henry fell into a deep depression, and he sought comfort in his favorite food. And what was that food? Lampreys. You know, those bizarre, eel-like, jawless fish with a suction-cut mouth full of teeth. His doctor repeatedly warned him they were bad for his health. But Henry simply couldn't stop eating them. He loved them. So in 1135, after a long day of hunting, Henry just gorged himself on a massive meal of lampreys, completely ignoring his doctor's advice. He contracted a severe case of food poisoning and died a week later. The Great Reformer, a king who had survived wars and political intrigue, was ultimately defeated by a plate of his favorite snack. For our final story, we have a king whose end was perhaps as terrible as his reputation. Meet Charles II of Navarre, a man so duplicitous and cruel that history simply calls him Charles the Bad. See, Charles desperately wanted to be the king of France, but he only inherited the much smaller kingdom of Navarre. This fueled a lifetime of scheming, backstabbing, and betraying both England and France during the Hundred Years' War. He was a political menace, but ultimately, a failure. In his later years, Charles the Bad fell gravely ill and became paralyzed. His doctor prescribed a unique treatment, wrapping him from head to toe in linen sheets soaked in brandy. A maid would then sew him into this boozy cocoon each night. Well, one evening, after finishing her work, she couldn't find scissors to cut the final thread, so she used the next best thing, a candle. The result was instantaneous. The alcohol-soaked sheets ignited, and Charles the Bad was, quite literally, flambéed in his own bed. So what do we make of all this? I mean, these were powerful men who commanded armies and shaped nations. Yet their final moments read like something out of a darkly comedic play. When you strip away the crowns and the titles, you're left with these everyday, mundane objects. A doorway, a toilet, a plate of fish, a simple candle. In the end, these were the things that sealed the fates of kings, ensuring they would be remembered not just for how they lived, but for the absolutely unbelievable way they died. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? For all their battles won and laws passed, their stories are forever defined by that one final, absurd moment, leaving us to ask, what's more powerful, a lifetime of ruling or one death that nobody could ever possibly forget?